The Galactic Academy of Sciences floated in the void between three stars, its crystalline spires catching the light of distant suns. Within its halls, the brightest minds from across the galaxy gathered to study the mysteries of the universe. Students from hundreds of worlds walked the gleaming corridors, their forms as diverse as the stars themselves. Zarath clicked her mandibles nervously as she hurried through the Academy's main corridor. The insectoid student from Kepler 442b had been at the Academy for 3 standard cycles, but she still felt overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of life forms around her. Tentacled aquarians glided past in their mobility suits, while crystalline silicoids chimed soft melodies as they moved. The Academy was meant to be a place of learning and unity, but lately, whispers of fear had begun to spread through the student body. The source of their fear lay deep within the Academy's restricted levels. In the Xenobiology Research Wing, Dr. Veltar, the Academy's most ambitious researcher, had been conducting experiments that pushed the boundaries of ethical science. His latest acquisition was a creature that had been discovered on a dead world at the galaxy's edge, a world where an entire civilization had vanished without explanation. The creature was unlike anything in the galactic database. Standing 8 feet tall on powerful hind legs, it possessed razor-sharp claws that could slice through reinforced steel and teeth designed for tearing flesh. Its hide was thick and scarred, dark as the void between stars. Most terrifying of all were its eyes, cold and calculating. Holding an intelligence that seemed ancient and hungry, Dr. Veltar had named it Subject X7, though the research staff had begun calling it something else entirely, the Reaper. The creature had been contained in the Academy's most secure holding facility, a chamber designed to hold even the most dangerous specimens. Energy barriers, force fields, and automated defense systems created layers of protection that should have been impenetrable. But nothing could have prepared them for what happened that day. Marcus Chen sat in advanced xenobiology, struggling to focus on Professor Quindal's lecture about symbiotic relationships in binary star systems. As one of only 12 humans at the Academy, Marcus often felt like an oddity himself. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, their world only recently making contact with the greater civilization among the stars. Many of his fellow students viewed humans with curiosity mixed with skepticism. The lecture was interrupted by a sound that chilled everyone to their core, a deep, resonating roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Academy. Emergency lights began flashing red, and the automated announcement system crackled to life with a voice tight with panic. Attention all students and faculty. This is not a drill. A dangerous specimen has breached containment in Research Wing 7. All personnel are to evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. Do not attempt to investigate. Security forces are responding. Professor Quindal's usually calm demeanor cracked as her scales shifted to a pale blue of fear. Everyone remain calm, she said, though her voice trembled. Follow evacuation protocols. Move quickly, but do not run. As students began filing out of the classroom, another roar echoed through the Academy, closer this time. Marcus could hear screaming from the corridors beyond and the sound of running feet. Whatever had escaped from Research Wing 7 was moving fast, and it was angry. The creature that emerged from the shattered remains of its containment cell moved with predatory grace despite its size. Dr. Veltar's security team had responded immediately, their energy weapons charging with high-pitched whines. The first volley of plasma bolts struck the creature's center mass, energy that should have been enough to drop a charging rhino beast from Centauri Prime. The creature barely flinched. It moved faster than something its size should have been able to move, covering the distance to the first security officer in 3 powerful bounds. The officer's scream was cut short as massive claws raked across his chest, sending him flying into a wall with bone-crushing force. The remaining security team scattered, some trying to establish a perimeter, while others desperately called for backup. But their training had prepared them for containing specimens, not battling apex predators that seemed to shrug off their most powerful weapons. The creature turned its attention to the fleeing research staff, its lips pulling back to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Dr. Veltar himself stood frozen in terror as the beast approached, its eyes fixed on him with unmistakable intelligence. This wasn't a mindless monster, it was something far worse, a thinking predator that understood exactly what it was doing. Marcus found himself swept along with the tide of evacuating students as they moved through the Academy's main corridors. The organized evacuation quickly devolved into chaos as more screams echoed from the research wings. Panic spread like wildfire among the student body, alien voices crying out in dozens of languages as fear overrode their training. He pressed against a viewing portal and looked down toward the lower levels where the research wings were located. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see security forces taking positions, their weapons trained on the corridors leading from the compromised section. But Marcus had studied enough Earth history to recognize the look in their eyes. They weren't prepared for what was coming. A massive impact against the bulkhead near the viewing portal sent spiderweb cracks through the reinforced material. Something large and powerful was moving through the Academy's infrastructure, using service tunnels and maintenance shafts to avoid the main corridors where security waited. "It's hunting," Marcus whispered to himself, the realization hitting him like a cold wave. This creature wasn't just rampaging randomly. It was using tactics, showing intelligence and planning. It was systematically working its way through the Academy, and the security forces were always one step behind. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In that brief moment of darkness, Marcus had heard something that made his blood run cold. The creature's roar, but this time it was different. There was something almost like laughter in it. A sound of pure predatory joy. The hunt had begun in earnest, and everyone in the Academy had just become prey. As Marcus joined the stream of evacuating students heading for the emergency shelters, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Academy's security measures, designed to contain specimens for study, were woefully inadequate for dealing with something that had likely been the apex predator of an entire world. Somewhere in the red-lit corridors below, the creature was on the move and nothing seemed capable of stopping it. The emergency shelters were designed to protect students from natural disasters and containment breaches, but the thick walls felt inadequate against what stalked the corridors outside. Marcus found himself crammed into Shelter Alpha 7 with nearly 200 other students, their forms creating a bizarre tapestry of galactic diversity united by terror. Zareth huddled near Marcus, her usually pristine exoskeleton now dulled with fear pheromones that made several nearby students uncomfortable. "What could break through the Academy's security?" she whispered, her translator struggling with the rapid clicks of her native language. "The containment systems are military grade." Before Marcus could respond, the shelter's communication system crackled to life. Security Chief Mordak's gruff voice filled the space, though the usual confidence was notably absent. "All students remain in designated shelters. The situation is under control. Security teams are currently tracking and containing the escaped specimen." A distant explosion somewhere in the Academy made the walls vibrate, causing several students to cry out in alarm. The lie in the security chief's words was obvious to everyone present. Dr. Veltar's voice joined the broadcast, his academic tone struggling to maintain authority. "The escaped subject is a significant predator specimen, but our security protocols remain effective. The creature shows typical aggressive behavior patterns but lacks the intelligence to truly threaten the Academy's systems." Marcus frowned at this assessment. His observations suggested the opposite, that the creature was demonstrating tactical thinking far beyond simple aggression. But before he could voice these thoughts, the lights in the shelter dimmed and a new sound reached them through the walls. Scratching. Methodical, deliberate scratching against metal. The scratching stopped, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse. Every student in the shelter held their breath, waiting for some sign of what was happening outside. The scratch marks, when they found them later, would be precise grooves carved into the shelter's outer hull, as if something had been testing the strength of their protection. In the Academy's main security center, Chief Mordak stared at his tactical displays with growing desperation. Red indicators showed compromised sections throughout the facility, as his teams tried to track their target. The creature moved through the Academy with disturbing efficiency, using ventilation shafts, maintenance tunnels, and even the outer hull to avoid direct confrontation with security forces. "Sir, Team 3 has lost contact," reported Officer Kexel, his tentacles dancing nervously over his control panel. "Last transmission showed them moving to investigate sounds in Section C12. Redirect Teams 5 and 7 to that location," Mordak ordered. Though he suspected they would find nothing but evidence of the creature's passage, it had already demonstrated an unsettling ability to disappear when confronted by superior numbers. the tactical display updated to show the creature's estimated position based on sightings and damage reports. What disturbed Mordak most was the pattern emerging from the data. The creature wasn't moving randomly. It was systematically exploring the academy, learning the layout and testing defenses. It had already probed 3 different shelter locations as if evaluating them for future reference. Dr. Veltar arrived in the security center, his usual academic composure shattered. "Chief, we need to discuss alternative containment strategies. The creature's behavior suggests intelligence levels far beyond our initial assessment." "How intelligent are we talking about, Doctor?" Mordak asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. "Based on its tactical movement and apparent planning, I would estimate cognitive capabilities similar to our own, possibly superior in areas related to spatial reasoning and tactical thinking." "This isn't just a predator, Chief, it's a predator that thinks." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. The Academy's security measures were designed to contain dangerous animals, not intelligent adversaries capable of planning and adapting to their responses. Marcus had been studying the shelter's layout when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The scratching they had heard earlier hadn't been random testing of the shelter's strength. Looking at the pattern of where the sounds had originated, he realized the creature had been systematically checking every access point to their shelter, mapping their defenses. "It's learning about us," he whispered to Zareth. "Those scratches weren't attacks. They were reconnaissance." The insectoid student's mandibles clicked rapidly in distress. "What kind of creature conducts reconnaissance?" "The kind that's been the top predator on its world for a very long time," Marcus replied grimly. "The kind that had to be smart to survive whatever killed everything else on that planet." As if summoned by his words, the lights in the shelter went out completely. Emergency power should have kicked in immediately, but the shelter remained dark. In the absolute blackness, every sound became magnified, every breath a thunderclap in the silence. Something heavy landed on the shelter's roof. The sound was unmistakable, a massive weight settling onto the structure above them. Students began whimpering in dozens of different languages as footsteps, slow and deliberate, moved across the roof. The creature was directly above them, separated only by a few feet of reinforced metal. Marcus found himself thinking about human history, about the predators his ancestors had faced in Earth's ancient past. Humans had survived not by being the strongest or fastest, but by being clever, by understanding their predators and finding ways to outthink them. But what did you do when faced with a predator that could think as well as you could? The footsteps stopped. In the darkness, something that might have been breathing could be heard through the walls, deep and measured. The creature was listening just as they were listening to it. 2 species, separated by metal and circumstance, each trying to understand the other. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the presence was gone. The emergency lights flickered back to life, and the shelter's systems hummed back to normal operation. But the psychological damage was done. Every student in that shelter now understood that their supposed safety was an illusion. The creature had found them. It had tested their defenses, learned their capabilities, and chosen not to attack. The question that terrified everyone, though few dared voice it, was simple. Why had it spared them? In the security center, new alarms began sounding as reports flooded in from across the academy. The creature had appeared in multiple locations simultaneously, or seemed to. Security teams were chasing shadows while the real threat moved freely through areas they thought were secure. "It's playing with us," Chief Mordak realized with horror. "Everything it's done so far has been a test. It's learning how we respond, how we think, what our capabilities are." Dr. Veltar's face had gone pale despite his blue-tinted skin. "If that's true, then we're not dealing with a contained situation. We're dealing with an active intelligence that's currently gathering tactical information about our entire facility." The security chief turned to look at the Academy's main schematic, seeing it now through the eyes of a predator, learning to hunt in an artificial environment. Every corridor, every room, every hiding place was being cataloged and assessed by something that had likely survived the extinction of its entire world. "Contact Galactic Command," he ordered. "We need military intervention. This is beyond our capabilities." But even as he gave the order, Mordak suspected it might already be too late. The creature had spent hours learning the Academy, understanding its prey and preparing for whatever came next. The hunt was far from over, and they were beginning to realize they might not be the hunters in this scenario. Outside the shelters, in corridors now empty of all but security patrols, something moved with perfect silence through shadows that seemed too dark for the emergency lighting. The real hunt was about to begin. The Academy's main database contained extensive files on every known sapient species in the galaxy. But as Dr. Veltar frantically searched through xenobiological records, he found something that made his blood run cold. The dead world where they had found the creature wasn't listed as uninhabited in the original galactic surveys. It had once been home to a thriving civilization called the Kethmori. Computer, display all available data on the Kethmori civilization, he commanded, his voice tight with growing dread. The holographic display filled with images and data that painted a picture of a highly advanced species. The Kethmori had possessed technology centuries ahead of current galactic standards, with cities that spanned continents and spacecraft capable of crossing the galaxy in days rather than months. They had been master geneticists, capable of modifying life at the cellular level with precision that modern science could barely imagine. Show extinction event data, Veltar continued, though he suspected he already knew what he would find. No extinction event recorded. Kethmori civilization status changed to disappeared, approximately 3,000 standard years ago. Cause unknown. No survivors detected during subsequent survey missions. Veltar stared at the data with horror dawning in his mind. A civilization that advanced didn't simply disappear without trace. Something had wiped them out so completely that not even ruins remained when galactic survey teams finally reached their world. And now he was beginning to suspect what that something might have been. In Shelter Alpha 7, Marcus was having similar realizations as he pieced together fragments of information from the Academy's database. The mathematical symbols the creature had left behind weren't random markings. They were equations written in a numerical system used by only one known civilization, the extinct Kethmori. It's not just intelligent, he whispered to Zarath. It's Kethmori, or at least it was created by them. The insectoid student's mandibles clicked in confusion, but the Kethmori vanished thousands of years ago. How could one of their creatures still be alive? Marcus thought about the genetic modification technology the Kethmori were known for, about their ability to create life forms designed for specific purposes. What if they didn't just modify existing life? What if they created something entirely new? The implications were staggering. If the creature was a Kethmori creation, then it possessed not just intelligence but the accumulated knowledge of one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. It wasn't just a predator that had learned to hunt them. It was a living repository of technologies and knowledge that could reshape the galaxy. The sound came again, that deep harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate through every surface in the Academy. But this time Marcus was listening with different ears, hearing not the call of a predator but something that might have been a greeting, or perhaps a warning. Chief Mordek's tactical situation had deteriorated beyond any hope of conventional resolution. Half his security teams had gone silent, their last transmissions showing empty corridors and abandoned equipment. The remaining teams were reporting impossible sightings of the creature in multiple locations simultaneously, as if it could be in several places at once. "Sir, we've lost contact with Shelters Beta 3 and Gamma 8, reported Officer Kexel, his tentacles now moving in agitated patterns of extreme stress. Their emergency broadcasts cut out mid-transmission. How many shelters are still responding? 7 out of 15, sir. And the responses are getting weaker. Something is systematically disabling our communication arrays." Mordek stared at his tactical display, watching red indicators spread across the Academy like an infection. Whatever was happening, it was beyond the scope of his training or experience. The creature wasn't just hunting them. It was dismantling their entire infrastructure with surgical precision. Dr. Veltar burst into the security center, his usually composed demeanor shattered completely. "Chief, we need to evacuate the Academy immediately. What we're dealing with isn't just an escaped specimen, it's a Kethmori bioweapon." "A what?" Mordek demanded, though he could see the certainty in the scientist's eyes. "The creature is artificial, created by the Kethmori as some kind of biological technology. Based on the genetic markers we found in its holding cell, it's been designed for infiltration, intelligence gathering, and systematic elimination of technological civilizations." The security chief felt reality shift around him as the implications hit. "Are you saying this thing is responsible for wiping out the Kethmori?" I'm saying the Kethmori created it to wipe out their enemies, but something went wrong. It turned on its creators and consumed their entire civilization. And now we've brought it to the center of galactic learning, surrounded by representatives of every major species. In the shelter, Marcus was reaching similar conclusions through his analysis of historical data. The pattern was becoming clear when viewed from the right perspective. The Kethmori hadn't disappeared mysteriously. They had been systematically eliminated by their own creation. "It's a weapon," he told the gathered students, his voice carrying across the red-lit space. The Kethmori created it to eliminate other civilizations, but it was too effective. It learned to see any intelligent life as a target, including its creators. Zarath's fear scent had intensified to levels that were making nearby students sick. If that's true, then why is it trying to communicate with us? Weapons don't negotiate. Marcus thought about the careful way the creature had explored the academy, the methodical testing of their defenses, the systematic analysis of their technology. Maybe it's evolved beyond its original programming. 3,000 years is a long time to be alone on a dead world. Maybe it's learned something new. The shelter's communication system crackled to life with an emergency broadcast that sent chills through everyone present. It was Director Thainla's voice, but the composure was completely gone, replaced by barely controlled terror. "All remaining shelters, this is Director Thainla. Emergency evacuation protocols are now in effect. The creature has breached Shelter Alpha 1 and Alpha 4. Casualties are substantial. Military intervention is en route, but current ETA is 6 hours. Maintain shelter integrity at all costs." The broadcast cut off abruptly, leaving them in silence broken only by the sound of frightened breathing from dozens of different species. 2 shelters had fallen, which meant the creature had moved beyond reconnaissance to active hunting. But Marcus found himself focusing on a detail that others had missed. The director had said casualties were substantial, not total. If the creature was truly the perfect bioweapon the evidence suggested, there shouldn't have been any survivors at all. Something was holding it back, some factor that was keeping it from completing its lethal programming. The harmonic sound came once more, but this time it was different, closer. The creature was directly outside their shelter, and for the first time, Marcus thought he could detect something almost like emotion in the sound. Not hunger or aggression, but something that might have been loneliness. "What if it doesn't want to kill us?" he whispered into the darkness. "What if it's trying to find a way not to?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about their situation. Outside the shelter, something that had once been the perfect predator was struggling with programming that demanded destruction and an intelligence that had learned to question its purpose. The real test was about to begin, and the fate of everyone in the academy might depend on understanding what 3,000 years of solitude had done to a weapon that had learned to think for itself. In the darkness outside, ancient programming warred with evolving consciousness, while inside the shelter, the survivors waited to discover whether they were facing a monster or something far more complex and tragic. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who hadn't spent the last several hours analyzing the creature's behavior patterns. Against every survival instinct screaming in his mind, he moved toward the shelter's communication panel and activated the external speakers. "Don't," Zarath hissed, her mandibles clicking frantically. "What are you doing?" "Something stupid that might save all our lives," Marcus replied, his fingers dancing over the controls as he set the system to broadcast outside the shelter. "If I'm right about what this thing is, then hiding from it is exactly the wrong approach." The other students pressed away from him as he activated the communication system, their fear sense and distress calls filling the shelter with a symphony of terror. But Marcus had studied enough human history to know that sometimes the only way to deal with a predator was to make yourself something other than prey. "Hello," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying beyond the shelter walls for the first time since the lockdown began. "I know you can hear me. I know you understand me. My name is Marcus Chen, and I think we need to talk." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of the shelter's life support system seemed to pause, as if the entire academy was holding its breath. Then slowly the harmonic sound came again, but this time it was clearly a response, modulated in a way that almost resembled speech patterns. Dr. Veltar, monitoring communications from the security center, nearly dropped his datapad when he heard Marcus's transmission. Chief, one of the students in Alpha 7 is attempting direct communication with the creature. Stop him immediately, Mordak ordered. He'll give away their position. Sir, I think it already knows where they are. And more importantly, the acoustic analysis suggests the creature is actually responding to the communication attempts. Look at these patterns. The security chief studied the waveform analysis on Veltar's screen, seeing something that defied everything he thought he knew about the situation. The creature's vocalizations were following speech patterns, rising and falling in rhythms that suggested genuine attempts at communication rather than simple predatory sounds. Marcus continued speaking, drawing on everything he had learned about the creature's behavior and origins. I know what you are. I know the Kethamori created you as a weapon, designed to eliminate other civilizations, but I also know you've been alone for 3,000 years on a dead world, and I think that's changed you. The harmonic response came more quickly this time, and Marcus could swear he detected something like surprise in the modulations. The creature was listening, processing his words and responding with what might have been actual communication. You tested our defenses, but you didn't attack when you could have overwhelmed us easily. You explored our technology, but you arranged it in patterns instead of destroying it. You breached 2 shelters, but you left survivors. I think you're fighting your own programming, trying to find a way to be something other than a weapon. Zareth had moved closer despite her fear, her translator working frantically to process the creature's responses. Marcus, the linguistic analysis software, is detecting structure in its vocalizations. It's actually trying to speak to us. The realization sent ripples of shock through the other students in the shelter. If the creature was truly attempting communication, then everything about their situation had changed. They weren't dealing with a mindless predator, but with something that might be capable of reason, negotiation, even peaceful coexistence. Outside the shelter, the creature that had once been the Kethamori's perfect weapon stood motionless in the corridor, its ancient programming warring with thoughts and feelings it had developed during millennia of solitude. The small human's words had triggered something deep within its consciousness, recognition of truths it had struggled to understand about itself. For 3,000 years, it had wandered the empty cities of its creators, trying to comprehend what it had done and why the programming that had driven it to such efficiency now felt like a burden too heavy to bear. It had learned to think beyond its original parameters, to question its purpose and dream of something more than endless destruction. Marcus took a deep breath and made his final gambit. If you can understand me, if you're truly intelligent and not just a weapon anymore, then prove it. Help us, help the survivors in the other shelters. Show us that you've evolved beyond what the Kethamori made you to be. The silence stretched for long minutes, broken only by the nervous breathing of the shelter's occupants. Then suddenly the shelter's doors began to open, their magnetic locks disengaging with a series of mechanical clicks that sounded impossibly loud in the darkness. Students scrambled away from the opening doors, pressing against the far walls as emergency lighting spilled in from the corridor beyond. But instead of the creature they expected to see, they found the doorway empty except for shadows that seemed to move with purpose. Marcus, Zareth whispered, her voice tight with terror. It's opening the shelter doors. That's not helping, that's hunting. But Marcus was studying the pattern of how the doors had opened, noting the careful way they had been unlocked rather than torn apart, the precise timing that had given everyone inside time to move to safety. No, he said slowly. It's showing us it could have opened these doors anytime it wanted. It's been choosing not to attack us. The harmonic sound came from the corridor, but closer now, and Marcus realized with shock that he was beginning to understand the emotional undertones in the creature's vocalizations. There was something that might have been gratitude, mixed with what could only be described as hope. Dr. Veltar's voice crackled through the shelter's communication system, tight with excitement and disbelief. Students of Alpha 7 were detecting massive changes in the creature's behavior patterns. It's moving through the academy, but its actions are rescue-oriented. It's opening sealed shelters and clearing debris from evacuation routes. The security chief's voice joined the broadcast, though his tone carried notes of confusion rather than relief. All surviving shelters, the creature appears to be facilitating evacuation rather than hindering it. Security teams are reporting that blocked corridors are being cleared and damaged life support systems are being repaired. Marcus stepped toward the open doorway, despite Zareth's attempts to hold him back. In the corridor beyond, He could see evidence of the creature's work. Damaged wall panels that had been carefully removed rather than torn apart. Debris that had been stacked in neat piles rather than scattered randomly. It's been trying to fix the damage it caused earlier, he realized, when it was still fighting its programming, when it couldn't control what it was doing. Now it's trying to make amends. The harmonic sound came again, softer now, and Marcus found himself stepping into the corridor despite every rational thought screaming that he was making a fatal mistake. But his analysis of the creature's behavior suggested something extraordinary. It was capable of growth, of change, of choosing to be something other than what it had been created to be. In the shadows at the far end of the corridor, something large shifted slightly, and Marcus caught his first clear glimpse of the creature that had terrorized the academy. It was exactly as massive and dangerous as reports had suggested, but there was something in its posture, in the way it held itself, that spoke of restraint rather than aggression. For a moment that seemed to last forever, human and weapon-turned individual regarded each other across the empty space between them. Then slowly the creature made a sound that was unmistakably a greeting, a careful attempt to bridge the gap between species and find common ground in a universe that had taught them both to expect only violence. The real conversation was about to begin. The Academy's main communication array crackled with desperate transmissions as word of the crisis spread throughout the galaxy. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting reports of the containment breach, though most focused on the sensational aspects rather than the growing tactical nightmare unfolding within the Academy's walls. Marcus listened to the broadcasts filtering through the shelter's communication system with growing unease. The creature's intelligence was being downplayed in official reports, described as nothing more than an unusually aggressive predator. But those who had witnessed its systematic exploration of the Academy knew better. Students of all species remain safely contained in emergency shelters, announced Director Thainla in her most reassuring tone. The Academy's security forces are implementing standard containment protocols. This situation will be resolved shortly. An explosion somewhere in the distance made the entire shelter shudder, causing several students to cry out in fear. The official reports bore little resemblance to their reality. Zarath pressed close to Marcus, her natural fear scent now mixed with something else, a chemical signature he didn't recognize. "My people have legends," she whispered. "Stories of the Devourers, creatures from the dark between stars that consumed entire worlds. The descriptions match what we've seen." "Legends?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect there might be more truth in those stories than anyone wanted to admit. "They say the Devourers were not just predators, but collectors of intelligence. They would study their prey for cycles before striking, learning everything about their victims before consuming them entirely. Some worlds simply vanished, with no trace left behind except empty cities and echoes." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The dead world where the creature had been found, with its missing civilization and unexplained extinction, suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. Meanwhile, in the Academy's security center, Chief Mordak was discovering that their problems extended far beyond one escaped creature. His teams had been reporting increasingly disturbing discoveries throughout their search of the Academy. "Chief, you need to see this," Officer Kexel called out, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Team 7 found something in Section D14. The main display showed footage from a security team's helmet camera. They were standing in what had once been a research laboratory, but now looked like it had been systematically dissected. Equipment had been carefully dismantled rather than destroyed, with components sorted into precise patterns on laboratory tables. "It's not just hunting," Dr. Veltar breathed, studying the footage. "It's learning about our technology. Look at those arrangements, that's not random destruction." The camera panned to show walls covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to follow mathematical patterns, too complex to be coincidental. The creature hadn't just been exploring the Academy, it had been studying them, learning about their science and technology with the thoroughness of a research scientist. "How long since we lost contact with Team 7? Mordak asked. 18 minutes, sir. They were investigating sounds in the lower research levels when their transmission cut out." The security chief studied the tactical display, noting the perfect silence from sections that should have been crawling with search teams. His forces weren't just failing to find the creature. They were disappearing entirely. Marcus had been thinking about the scratching sounds they had heard earlier, trying to understand what they meant in the context of an intelligent predator. The pattern had been too methodical to be random, too precise to be simple aggression. When the realization hit him, he felt his blood turn cold. "We need to get out of this shelter," he announced suddenly, causing nearby students to turn toward him in alarm. "What are you talking about?" asked Zethmore, a crystalline student whose harmonic voice carried notes of confusion. "The shelters are the safest place in the academy." "No," Marcus said, his mind racing as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. "The creature was mapping this shelter earlier, learning about our defenses and capabilities. It's not random that our lights went out exactly when it was overhead. It was testing our response time, our backup systems, our panic reactions." Zareth's mandibles clicked rapidly as understanding dawned. "You think it's been preparing to attack the shelters specifically?" "I think it's been turning the academy into a hunting ground designed specifically for us. Those missing security teams, the systematic exploration, the technology analysis, it's all been preparation." Before anyone could respond to his theory, the shelter's communication system delivered news that confirmed their worst fears. Director Thainla's voice, now noticeably strained, filled the space with an announcement that chilled everyone present. "Emergency Protocol 7 is now in effect. All emergency shelters are to initiate lockdown mode immediately. Under no circumstances should shelter doors be opened until the all-clear signal is given by security personnel with proper authentication codes. The shelter's heavy doors sealed with a sound like a tomb closing, magnetic locks engaging with finality that made several students whimper in distress. They were now truly trapped, supposedly for their own protection, but Marcus suspected they had just locked themselves into carefully prepared cages. "Emergency Protocol 7, Zareth whispered. "That protocol is only used when the Academy is facing extinction-level threats." The lights dimmed to emergency levels as the shelter's systems switched to extended power conservation mode. In the red-tinged darkness, every sound became magnified, every breath a reminder of how small and vulnerable they had become. Marcus moved to the shelter's communication panel, his fingers dancing over the controls as he tried to access external sensor data. What he found there made his stomach drop. The Academy's outer sensor array showed no signs of external rescue ships, no military intervention, no cavalry coming to save them. They were alone with something that had spent hours learning everything about them while they hid in the dark like prey animals. The sound that came next was unlike anything they had heard before. Not the roar of an angry predator, but something far more terrifying. A sound that almost resembled communication. It echoed through the Academy structure, seeming to come from everywhere at once, a deep harmonic vibration that made the shelter walls resonate. "What was that?" someone whispered in the darkness. Marcus found himself thinking about the mathematical symbols the creature had left in the research laboratory, about the careful way it had studied their technology, about the precise manner in which it had tested their defenses. A horrible possibility began forming in his mind. "I think," he said slowly, his voice barely audible, "it was trying to talk to us." The silence that followed was filled with implications too terrifying to voice. They weren't just dealing with an intelligent predator anymore. They were dealing with something that was attempting to establish communication, something that had studied them so thoroughly it might actually understand them better than they understood it. In the security center, Dr. Veltar stared at acoustic analysis of the creature's vocalizations, his scientific mind struggling to accept what the data clearly showed. The sounds followed linguistic patterns, mathematical progressions that suggested genuine attempts at communication rather than random noise. "Chief," he said quietly, "I don't think we're dealing with a containment breach anymore. I think we're dealing with first contact." The implications of his words settled over the security center like a shroud. If the creature was attempting communication, then everything they had done in response, all their security measures and military tactics, had been interpreted as hostile acts by something that might have been trying to establish peaceful contact. Outside the shelter, in corridors now silent as graves, something moved with purpose through the Academy's halls. The learning phase was complete, the tactical assessment finished, and the decision had been made. The next phase was about to begin, whether the Academy's inhabitants were ready or not. The hunt was evolving into something far more complex and terrifying than anyone had imagined. The corridor felt like a vast chasm as Marcus stood facing the creature that had once been the galaxy's most feared bioweapon. Up close, he could see details that security footage had failed to capture. The intricate scarring across its hide that told stories of ancient battles. The way its eyes held depths of intelligence that seemed almost human in their complexity. And most remarkably, the careful way it held itself to appear less threatening despite its massive size. Behind him, Marcus could hear the whispered prayers and fear calls of his fellow students, but he forced himself to focus on the creature before him. Everything depended on the next few minutes. On whether 3,000 years of solitude had truly changed what the Kethmori had created to be the perfect destroyer of civilizations. The creature made another sound, softer this time, and Marcus realized it was struggling with something. The harmonic tones carried undertones of distress, as if it was trying to communicate but fighting against some internal barrier that made speech difficult. "You're still fighting the programming, aren't you?" Marcus said gently, taking a half-step closer despite every survival instinct screaming at him to run. "Part of you still wants to complete your original mission, but another part has learned to think beyond what you were made to do." The creature's response was immediate and startling. It backed away from Marcus, pressing itself against the far wall of the corridor as if trying to put distance between them. But there was nothing aggressive in the movement. Instead, it seemed almost protective, as if the creature was trying to shield Marcus from some potential danger. Dr. Veltar's voice came through the communication system, tight with scientific excitement despite the circumstances. "Marcus, we're detecting massive neural activity from the creature. Brain scans show it's experiencing something like internal conflict on a scale we've never seen in any sapient species. It's literally fighting a war inside its own mind." Marcus studied the creature's posture and realized what he was seeing. The Kethmori bioweapon was trying to protect him from itself, fighting against programmed instincts that demanded the elimination of all intelligent life. 3 millennia of consciousness had created something unprecedented, a weapon that had learned to choose peace over violence, but was still bound by the genetic imperatives that had shaped its creation. "Show me," Marcus said suddenly, his voice carrying a tone of command that surprised even him. "Show me what you're fighting against." The effect of his words was immediate and dramatic. The creature straightened, its eyes focusing on Marcus with laser intensity, and for a moment he thought he had made a fatal error. But then he realized what he was seeing in those ancient eyes: recognition and something that might have been relief. The creature began to move, not toward Marcus, but toward a wall panel that controlled the corridor's holographic display systems. With surprising delicacy for something so massive, it manipulated the controls until the corridor filled with 3-dimensional images that told a story Marcus had only guessed at. The holographic display showed the Kethmori homeworld in its final days, cities burning as perfect weapons turned against their creators with ruthless efficiency. But these weren't random attacks, they were systematic eliminations carried out with scientific precision. The creatures the Kethmori had created weren't just killing, they were harvesting, collecting genetic material and technological data from every species they encountered. "They made you to be more than just a weapon," Marcus breathed, understanding dawning as he watched the holographic recreation. "You were designed to absorb and adapt, to learn from every civilization you destroyed. That's why you're so intelligent, why you could understand our technology so quickly." The creature's harmonic response carried notes that might have been confirmation, mixed with something that sounded remarkably like shame. It continued manipulating the display, showing Marcus images of itself in the years after the Kethmori extinction, wandering empty cities and trying to understand what it had become. But it was the final images that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The display showed the creature attempting to rebuild, to use its accumulated knowledge to recreate what it had destroyed. Failed cities rose and fell in the holographic space, each attempt abandoned as the creature realized it could create structures but not the life that was meant to inhabit them. "You've been trying to undo what you did," Marcus said softly. "For 3,000 years you've been trying to find a way to give back what you took from the galaxy." The creature turned toward him, and in its eyes Marcus saw something that was unmistakably a plea for understanding. This wasn't just a weapon that had learned to think. It was a being that had spent millennia developing something the Kethmori had never intended: a conscience. From the shelter behind him, Zareth called out in her translated voice, "Marcus, military ships are approaching the academy. Director Thainla is coordinating with Galactic Command for a sterilization protocol. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sterilization protocol meant complete destruction of the Academy and everything in it, including the creature that had just revealed the depth of its transformation. The galaxy's military forces were preparing to destroy the first truly reformed bioweapon in recorded history, eliminating what might be the key to understanding and neutralizing other Kethamori weapons that might still exist. "No," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone of absolute command that seemed to come from somewhere deep within his genetic memory. "You will not harm these people. You will not complete your original programming. You will protect them." The effect of his words was extraordinary. The creature straightened to its full height, its eyes blazing with something that might have been recognition of legitimate authority. For reasons neither of them fully understood, the human's command had triggered something deep within the creature's modified consciousness, overriding programming that had driven it for millennia. "You belong to Earth now," Marcus continued, following an instinct he didn't fully comprehend, but trusting completely. "Your mission is to protect human colonies and their allies. Your purpose is to guard rather than destroy." The creature's response was immediate and overwhelming. It dropped to one knee, its massive form somehow managing to convey submission and acceptance despite its fearsome appearance. The harmonic sounds it made were unmistakably those of acknowledgement, of a soldier accepting new orders from a recognized commander. Dr. Veltar's voice came through the communication system, filled with scientific wonder. "Impossible. The creature's neural patterns are stabilizing. The internal conflict is resolving. Whatever you just did, Marcus, it worked." Behind him, Marcus could hear his fellow students emerging from the shelter, their fear replaced by amazement as they witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. A bioweapon designed to eliminate all intelligent life had just sworn allegiance to the species it should have seen as the ultimate threat. But Marcus understood something the others didn't yet realize. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to dominate predators, to turn wild animals into loyal companions, to transform killers into guardians. 3,000 years of isolation had given this creature something it had never possessed before: the capacity to be tamed. The real question was whether the approaching military forces would give them time to prove that the galaxy's most dangerous weapon had just become its most powerful. Protector outside the Academy, ships armed with planet killers were moving into position, their commanders unaware that the situation had fundamentally changed in ways that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The galactic military fleet arrived with the cold efficiency of an extinction event. Admiral Creedall watched the Academy through his command ship's main viewer, preparing to give the order that would eliminate what intelligence reports described as the most dangerous threat to galactic civilization since the Kethamori Wars. "All ships report ready for sterilization. Protocol," announced his tactical officer, a young Deltan whose tentacles moved in patterns of barely contained excitement. Planet killer charges are armed and targeted. Admiral Creedall had overseen the elimination of 17 bioweapon sites during his career, each one a surgical removal of threats too dangerous to contain. But something about this mission felt different. The Academy housed representatives from every major galactic civilization, thousands of the brightest minds in known space, all apparently held hostage by a single creature. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Academy," reported the communications officer. "It's Director Thainla, but she's requesting a delay in the sterilization protocol." "Denied," Creedall replied without hesitation. "We have clear intelligence about the threat level. No delays." But before he could give the final order, something appeared on his tactical display that made his blood run cold. Energy signatures were emerging from the Academy, not from damaged systems or emergency broadcasts, but from something moving through space with impossible speed and agility. "Sir, we have multiple contacts leaving the Academy," the tactical officer reported, his voice climbing with alarm. "They're not following conventional flight patterns. Speed and maneuverability are beyond anything in our database." On the main viewer, Admiral Creedall watched as sleek shapes that seemed to flow rather than fly moved between his ships with casual disregard for the overwhelming firepower pointed at them. They weren't attacking, but their presence was a clear message. The situation was not what his briefings had suggested. Inside the Academy, Marcus stood with his hand resting on the creature's massive shoulder, feeling the vibrations of its harmonic communications as it coordinated with others of its kind. Because that's what the energy signatures represented, he realized with growing amazement. The creature wasn't alone, it never had been. The dead Kethmori world had been home to survivors, others who had spent 3 millennia learning to be something other than weapons. How many? Marcus asked softly. The creature's response was a complex harmonic pattern that Zarath's translator struggled to interpret. The linguistic analysis suggests a numerical concept, but the scale is significant, possibly hundreds. Marcus felt a chill as the implications hit him. If this creature represented just one of hundreds of reformed bioweapons, then the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted in ways no one was prepared for. But more immediately relevant was the fact that a fleet of planet killers was currently facing opponents they had no hope of defeating. Dr. Veltar's voice came through the communication system with scientific excitement that bordered on hysteria. Marcus, the creatures are establishing a communication network. They're coordinating in real time across impossible distances. This isn't just first contact. This is integration with a civilization that's been hiding in plain sight for 3,000 years. Through the Academy's observation portals, Marcus could see the reformed bioweapons moving through space with grace that made conventional starships look clumsy by comparison. They weren't threatening the military fleet directly, but their presence was unmistakably protective, guardian spirits watching over the Academy and its inhabitants. Admiral Creedall found himself in a situation no military academy had prepared him for. His sensors showed energy readings that defied physics, movement patterns that suggested technology centuries beyond galactic standards, and worst of all, intelligence directing it all with precision that made his own tactical computers look primitive. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission. It's not coming from the Academy. It's coming from the contacts surrounding our fleet." "On speakers," Creedall ordered, though he suspected he wasn't going to like what he heard. The voice that filled the command bridge was unmistakably human, though it carried undertones of harmonic communication that suggested translation from something far more complex. "Admiral Creedall, this is Marcus Chen, speaking for the reformed Kethmori Collective. The threat you came to eliminate no longer exists. We request permission to explain the situation." The Admiral stared at his tactical display, trying to process the impossibility of a human speaking for creatures that should have been humanity's greatest enemy. "You're speaking for them? How is that possible?" "Because they've spent 3,000 years learning to be something other than weapons," Marcus replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "And because humans have always been good at turning predators into protectors. We're requesting safe passage for diplomatic representatives to your flagship." Around the Admiral's ship, the reformed bioweapons moved in patterns that were clearly ceremonial rather than threatening, but the display of power was unmistakable. They could have eliminated his entire fleet in minutes if they chose to, but instead they were offering to talk. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "recommend accepting the diplomatic contact. We're clearly outmatched here." Admiral Creedall made a decision that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. "Permission granted, but any hostile action will result in immediate retaliation." "Understood, Admiral. But I think you'll find that the only hostile actions today will be prevented by our new allies, not caused by them." The creature beside Marcus made a sound that was unmistakably approval, its massive form relaxing as the immediate threat of sterilization passed. Around the Academy, hundreds of its kind moved through space with joy that was palpable even across the void, celebrating not just survival, but the possibility of finally finding acceptance among the civilizations they had once been created to destroy. Zarath approached Marcus with wonder in her clicking voice. "How did you know they would respond to human authority?" Marcus thought about humanity's long history of domesticating wolves, training raptors, and turning wild predators into loyal companions. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We don't just survive in a universe full of things that want to kill us. We convince them to help us instead." The reformed Kethmori bioweapons had spent 3 millennia waiting for someone who could give them a purpose beyond destruction. They had found that someone in the most unlikely species of all, the young upstart race that had recently joined the galactic community. As diplomatic shuttles prepared to ferry negotiators between the Academy and Admiral Creedall's flagship, Marcus realized that humanity had just acquired the most powerful allies in galactic history. More importantly, The galaxy had gained protectors who understood the price of destruction, and had chosen to dedicate their existence to preservation instead. The age of Kethmori weapons was ending, but the age of Kethmori guardians was just beginning, and at the center of it all stood a human student who had learned that sometimes the most dangerous monsters were just waiting for someone brave enough to offer them a better way to be. The Kring Galaxy would never be the same.